property of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad throughout the world.
I was the only person who was not convicted. And I was being selected to find 23 hours a day, and sometimes for weeks, 24 hours a day. I wasn't allowed even to see my parents when she comes in. I wasn't allowed to call my families for 6 months. I wasn't allowed to make a single phone call.
No tomorrow. a while ago, and he's actually still not free, even though he was acquitted of the charges by the jury. He's in like house arrest now, still wearing an ankle bracelet, like about 3 years like that. And this was my first exposure to what people call preemptive prosecution. This is prosecution where there hasn't been a crime. And I was astounded by it that our government did things like that because he's clearly an innocent person. Sammy was a colleague. I knew him really well. I knew he was an innocent person. And this government still went ahead with this trial. And Steve, who's going to be speaking, he had a very similar experience in New York. Maybe he'll tell you about that. And we formed a group called Friends of Human Rights around Sammy's case. Steve was the founder of Project Salam in New York. And both of our two groups we were founding members of the coalition, the National Coalition to Protect Civil Freedoms in 2010. And again, as I said, I was astounded by that. And when Sammy was not released, Fred was making a cell. Did any of you see our cell outside? The solitary cell? Okay. Fred, the man who made that cell, he and I took the film USA versus Al area around the country, and we found out there's all kinds of cases like that. It was not just Sammy's. And another one is here, right there in Texas, with Holy Land Foundation, where 5 totally innocent people went to prison, and they're going to be hearing from the family members later this afternoon. And the other thing that shocked me about Sammy's case was the treatment that he was getting in prison. He spent 2.5 years in pre-trial solitary confinement with very restrictive solitary confinement. And since then, they found out almost all Muslims who are arrested and charged with terrorism go into solitary confinement, often for months before the trial. The purpose is to break them so that we can take treatment. And I've also found since then there are many people in this country in solitary confinement, but at least 80,000 people. And right here in Texas, there are 9,000 people in solitary confinement. And we're going to show you another short video. It was by the American Friends Service Committee. And at the whole you were out in our cell, our 6x9 cell, that was that if you did go in that, the man who just spent 41 years in solitary confinement in Louisiana and got out and died of liver cancer 4 years later, he spent 41 years in a cell exactly that size, 6x9, 23 hours a day. So one more video, and then we'll get to Steve.
The bucket became the box, the hole, the thing.
The chiller,
Vodka.
Maxi.
The shoes.
Solitary confinement.
The cell was probably like maybe 7 feet, maybe 9 feet long.
Maybe 9 by 6. It's very small.
The cell was a wooden cell.
The walls were cinder block.
The floor, it was concrete.
The bed is concrete. There's a small concrete slab that serves as your table.
You had nothing in the room but you.
It's hard to describe, nothing.
Is she a lonely body in a cell that's empty? That's what solitary confinement is.
Metal and cement.
That was it.
The light,
Just lights on most of the night.
double neon light.
The light would be on sometimes 24/7. It never went out.
The situation I was in, they never turned the lights on. The lights were out 24 hours a day. There was a big door that closed, and you didn't hear anything outside the door.
It can get eerily quiet in these places.
Real quiet.
Most of what you're going to hear is your own breathing. You might hear your heart rate pumping up. And so when there is a noise, it's just nerve-wracking.
Coming onto the tier, it's a heavy steel door, and it opens electrically, which means you hear.
wanted to talk to somebody, you know, just somebody to be there.
You can go days without talking to people, sometimes weeks, sometimes months.
You can't touch anyone.
Well, he would touch, except for aggressive touching by guards when they would come in to change me out, to take me out.
Even if you have family, there's no contact visits at all.
There's a glass in front of you with a person visiting you on the other side.
My daughters were trying to kiss the glass and kiss me through the glass.
It was painful. It was very painful.
I've spent 7.5 years in control.
Maybe about 12 years in lockdown.
I was there for 29 years, you know.
Many, many years in solitary confinement.
29 years, you know. Solitary confinement is just as real could be. It could wipe the mind.
It damages you psychologically, you know, because human beings need to interact with each other.
It's not normal to be in the dark for days and days and days on end.
I could hardly sleep. Like I had insomnia.
Waking up at night in the sweats, panic attacks.
It would trigger something. My nerves were, I would break out in hives from head to toe.
I lost track of time.
There's no concept of time. You know no time in lockdown. There's sleep and awakeness. That's it. And the madness in between the madness.
I would try to hear things, try to hear human voices, and sometimes I would imagine that I was hearing voices.
You start hearing things that's not even being said.
And say, yeah. No. Yeah, what? You know he's answering.
The anger, the rage, the bitterness, the anxiety, the nightmares. And as years pass, it just seems like the walls in the cell close in. They begin to close in. You can feel your mind like trying to escape from it.
And what happens is chaos.
Insane.
They'll say the end of the barrel. That's what the prison officials call it.
Call it maximum security, administrative segregation.
Control unit, stigma unit,
Isolation.
special housing. Lots.
You know, on and on and on and on and on.
So many.
I would say torture chambers, no other way to describe it.
Of course, it's torture. It's torture in every form of fashion.
Okay, so another thing you can do is we also have worked with the National Religious Campaign Against Torture, which is a very good national organization. And there's a petition on the table right outside. And what they do is when they get 500 signatures on a petition from a state, you take it to your state legislature. So if I could sign that before you go. And I also have a sign-up sheet for our National Coalition mailing list. So I'm going to leave that on the table here. And there's some other things on the table that are also outside. So go ahead and look those over before you leave. Are there any questions before me? Before I give up the podium? Okay, thank you all for coming. And thank you, Karma, for doing the organizing. It's very nice. And
I want to again thank you guys all for being here. I know that you guys just walked in. I also want to thank Amnesty International, like all the members at SMU for organizing this event as well. And I want to thank you guys for coming again. Now we're going to have Steve Downs, and he's going to be presenting to us about the cases and what the National Coalition to Protect Civil Freedoms is doing about these unjust cases. And then he's also going to talk about Know Your Rights, and he's going to let us know what we can do when we're, and what bills are important to speak out against that are infringing on our civil freedoms. So if you guys will give him a warm round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me here. It's such a pleasure to be down here in Texas. I hear so much about Texas in the news, and it's great to be here. My name is Steve Downs. I'm a lawyer based up in Albany, New York. And I became involved in this through a case that we had. You see Harbor. Where is this scene? There it is. You see Harbor. And at the time, I had retired. I was not doing anything particular. And when this case came up, I decided to volunteer with the defense to help out because there seemed something wrong with the charges. They just didn't seem to add up. And we went through the entire case, and by the time it was finished and he was convicted and given 15 years, I was convinced that the government had deliberately framed an innocent man. And this was an extraordinary experience for me because I had never before been in a situation where I had seen somebody deliberately framed by the government. I'd seen wrongful convictions. I'd seen mistakes made. But this wasn't a mistake. This was something quite different. And so my colleague, Kathy Manley, and I began to look around for other cases, and we began to find them all over the country. Similar cases, they presented very differently, but they all had the same quality about why did the government frame an innocent man? I know this person. He's not a terrorist. He's not someone who violates the law. Why did they frame him? And finally, we formed an organization called Project Salam, and we decided to make a database of all these cases. And we began eventually to follow some 800 cases. We are now really actively advocating for about 200 of those cases. And then eventually we had an opportunity to form a coalition of groups, some 20 organizations, to try to do something about this problem. It became the National Coalition to Protect Civil Freedoms. And I can honestly say with great pride that this is an organization that was essentially formed by political prisoners, by people in this situation. And so they are the people we serve. They are the people to whom we respond as we try to get their message out and their story so that people will understand what is happening to them, but also to our own country. The National Coalition to Protect Civil Freedoms has 3 campaigns. One is profiling, one is preemptive prosecution, and one is the prisoner abuse, particularly through solitary confinement. You all probably have a pretty good idea what profiling is. Profiling, of course, we're under the law, we're all supposed to be treated equally. Profiling is when people are not treated equally because of their gender or because of their religion or ethnicity or some other factor that is irrelevant to the cases against them, and they're treated unfairly because of that. Preemptive prosecution is an extreme form of profiling. It is where the government says, there are things about your religion, your ideology, that your ethnicity, that make me suspicious. And because you are suspicious, I'm going to bring charges against you, pretext charges, fake charges, and get you locked up. And in that way, preempt any possibility that something might happen as a result of these factors that make me uncomfortable. Yes?
Do you mind accepting questions?
Oh, no, go ahead, that's fine. I'm delighted.
So what are the pretext charges normally? What do they consist of? I know, like, for example, after he was in prison for attempted murder. Are they like immigration charges, tax charges? What are they generally pretext?
Well, they're very clever in how they do it, and I will explain a little bit about this. Basically, I think that you're leading right into my next point. There are basically 2 ways they do it. One of the things that they did was to pass laws, material support for terrorism laws. And what these laws did was they basically make it very difficult, or actually prohibitive, of having any contact with a designated foreign terrorist organization. Now, terrorism itself, the very notion of terrorism, is kind of nonsense because you cannot define it. It is not defined. It's defined so broadly as to take in much of what we consider normal activity. It is actually defined as anyone who would either by using illegal means or the threat of violence, try to influence public policy or intimidate the public. The threat of violence. Now you can imagine this includes a very large part of what we call dissent. But anyway, these are material support for terrorism laws, and I think all of you have a general sense of what might be included in that. For example, if you sent guns to a designated terrorist organization, you say, yeah, that sounds like material support. And we don't necessarily want to encourage designated terrorist organizations from shooting people or killing people, or sending them money maybe so they can do it. But these laws go much, much further. And what they essentially do is they criminalize basic civil liberties. Basically, civil liberties like free speech, free association, charity, peacemaking, and even social hospitality. And these are some of the things that the government uses to get people who they for one reason or another, want to take down. And for example, you just saw the case of Samuel Laring. This was a classic case of free speech. This was a person who felt, as a Palestinian, felt that Palestinians had rights as well. And in the problems in the Middle East, he was very outspoken, that the Palestinians deserved to be heard. The government took the position that that speech, if coordinated with designated terrorist organizations, was itself material support for terrorism. And to think about that. Your free speech is no longer free as long as it is somehow coordinated with a foreign designated terrorist organization. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean that you met with somebody from the foreign terrorist organization? That you read their literature? That you saw something? That you merely believed the same ideas that the organization itself believed? Would that be enough to have coordinated speech? The Supreme Court has never defined it, and so of course it is a chilling effect on all of our free speech. But the fact that they would go after somebody like Professor Samuel Laring, simply because of the things he said, indicate how very extreme the government is willing to take us, to the extent of saying, we don't really care. That's not our point. Our point is, we don't like you. We don't like what you're saying. You make us suspicious. We want you in jail. And if you fail the first time, we're going to keep after you until we get you there. And that's that pattern that we see throughout these cases. You're going to hear about the Holy Land Foundation case, I think, in a few minutes. So I'm going to skip over that. I just want to mention a couple of other kinds of cases. In one case, Bahad Hashmi case down in New York City was a case in which there was a student who was living abroad in Britain, and a friend of his, more of an acquaintance, Julia Barber, came by and stayed for a week, and then left a bag of clothes in his apartment, said he would come back in a week to get them. And he did. He came back in a week and got them. And those clothes eventually, through circuitous routes, eventually made their way to the Taliban. They were waterproof ponchos and socks. And so the FBI actually picked up Julian Barber and sort of worked back through who he had contacted on the way and found that he had left this bag of clothes in Hashmi's apartment for 1 week. And that was material support for terrorism. And so they went and they arrested him, brought him over to the United States, put him in solitary confinement for 3 years, and kept after him until finally he realized that he could not get a fair trial and pled guilty, and is now serving, I think, 20-some years, simply for the act of storing a bag of clothes in his apartment. And another case we have of a group, you notice up on the wall here, I have some pink people up in the corner, the left-hand corner. These are all these people that were advocating for the National Coalition. In fact, we have a much larger group. These are only 155 people, and I don't even have room to have them all. But I've brought these things down because I want their storyboard. I want their names public. I want them remembered. I've had people call me from the jail, and they said, please, I've exhausted all my appeals. I have no other legal recourse left. Put me on your wall. I don't want to be forgotten. And I don't want them forgotten either. Anyway, the pink folks up there in the corner are peace activists from the Midwest. And what they did was they go to places where there is conflict, and they try to get people to stop using violence and to settle their differences peacefully, and to learn how to interact with other groups and governments to work out their problems in a democratic way. To the government, the United States government, that is material support for terrorism. because it requires that you, on occasion, where there are terrorist organizations involved, interact with these terrorist organizations and give them good advice on how not to become terrorists. And that is material support for terrorism. And I want you to understand how far the government is willing to push this. So these folks up here had the FBI raid their house. They broke down the door. They held the families at gunpoint. They went through the houses, and they took things like computers and books and children's artwork and they, actually the joke is that a lot of these people talk about later, they said, and they found the gun in my closet or something, but they weren't interested in that. That's not what they're interested in. What they're interested in is ideology. What do you believe? Because what you believe will be, to them, an indication of the kind of crimes you might commit somewhere down the future. And if they can preempt it by prosecuting you now for, let's say, having tried to talk a designated terrorist organization out of committing terrorism, that's great. They could lock you up for 20 years for that. And then they wouldn't have to worry about something else happening. So this is basically a war on ideology. And I have to say, it is a war that is being conducted at the traditional four groups, well, probably three groups, that Americans have traditionally made war on, which are African Americans, the immigrants, and the political left, the communists. And so those are all well represented here. And of course, the Muslims are the next group that are being represented. They're in the green. The other major way that they get people who they are suspicious of is through agent provocateurs. These are people that go in and try to talk people into doing something or saying something that would be sufficient to get charges against them. And they go to truly extraordinary lengths. The case of Tariq Shaw, for example, this is a famous jazz musician who also had a martial arts school. And for some reason, we don't know why the FBI was suspicious of him. So they hired a guy to go down to try to talk him into some sort of a crime. And the guy came over to him and said, "Can you give me bass lessons, trying to learn how to play jazz?" He gave him lessons. Then he said, "I lost my apartment. Can I move in with you?" He moved in with him. He was his best friend for months, living in the apartment and secretly walking around with a tape recorder, trying to persuade him to say things which would be sufficient to get an indictment. And eventually they were succeeded in getting an indictment. And eventually he had to plead guilty, got 22 years in jail. That kind of single-minded determination is really extraordinary because they had decided they were going to get him. And the same was true of our case, the Aref case. They had decided long ago that they were going to get rid of him, going to take him down. And they constructed an elaborate scheme, which I think he had never heard of, never understood, did not understand a word of it. The other kind of case that you get sometimes is represented by the Newburgh Four, where they hired an agent to go down and see if there's anything going on in this mosque. So he hung outside the mosque and he tried to talk people into getting involved in jihad until he finally found a guy, and he portrayed himself as a very wealthy businessman, and he finally found a guy that was down on his luck and really needed some money and saw this guy as a old guy who could shake down for money. Now, Newburgh, New York, I don't know if you know that, but it's one of the poorest communities in the country. It's very, very poor. And they eventually recruited 4 other people, and the government offered them, through this agent provocateur, $250,000 to simply take a bomb and put it outside a synagogue. And these are people that had no car, no guns, no credit card. They had no money. They had no skills whatsoever. They had just recently converted to Islam while in jail, and they didn't know anything about the religion. They had no ability to organize. And the FBI provided all that. They said, "We'll give you the money, we'll give you the guns, we'll give you the bomb, we'll drive you to the place, we'll help you pick the target, we'll do everything. All you have to do is get out of the car and put the bomb in front of the synagogue, and we'll give you $250,000. Well, I want you to just understand that in that community, you could probably get somebody to commit arson on a building for much less, for $500. $250,000 was an enormous amount to pay for that. And as the defendants indicated, they believed they could get money out of this guy. the FBI sting agent said, I think I can get some convictions out of this, and government won. So those are some of the kinds of cases that we are dealing with, and the kinds of issues that they bring to it. I know a lot of the families from this. One of the things that the National Coalition does is we believe in supporting both the prisoners and the families as much as possible. We have a conference every 6 months in which we bring families from the prisoners together to talk about their problems. Last one time, for example, they were very interested in learning, how do you deal with the media? When the media comes around and says, you are terrorists, how do you get your story out over that narrative? How do you get your story out about the fact that this man was extraordinarily compassionate and he cared about people, and all they were trying to do was to make peace or to bring healing? So we had to practice sitting down and actually working on these kind of things. We tried to keep in touch with the prisoners. Very often they have a lot of issues and problems. And very often people that are associated with these families have the need of lawyers. And we try to find the lawyers to get access to it, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. We also, of course, do education, and Mel is the head of our education committee, and so we're delighted to be able to come to places like SMU and talk about this, because we want these issues out there. We want people to understand that there's an organization that is supporting the families and the prisoners. We have some really great legislation that we think would be terrific, would change things, but unfortunately in Washington these days it's hard to get a bunch of legislation through, so we're not making much headway with that. We have people that are working with the media, and we have a legal committee that helps provide people with lawyers. So those are some of the activities that we are working on right now. I have a couple of minutes left, and I just wanted to sort of segue into a little section on knowing your rights. One of the things with the education of people, we want to make sure that we don't have any more people getting caught up in stings and bad operations by the FBI. And it's important that everybody know their rights. So I just wanted to go a little bit through it. You probably all know the drill, but I do recommend there's this little book that's been put out by the National Lawyers Guild. The National Lawyers Guild is part of our coalition. They've been tremendously helpful. I get calls all the time from people saying, I've got the FBI agent outside my door, I'm in Pittsburgh, what do? And I can call somebody from the National Lawyers Guild, and usually, typically within a few hours, we can locate somebody in Pittsburgh who's willing to represent the person and go down there and take care of the problem. So I strongly urge you, this has some numbers in here you can call, and it's a really good book. I don't know, do you want to just put up my 3 favorite sentences? It's actually rather simple in terms of what you have to know about your rights. The first thing is you don't have to talk to an FBI agent if they want to talk to you, and this frequently happens. The FBI agent's quite active. They come down and they will get a hold of you and say, we'd like to talk to you. Will you come down to the FBI headquarters? Whenever that happens, the standard response is you don't have to talk to an FBI agent. If they're persistent, you simply say, give me your card. I will have my lawyer call you. So I want everybody here to say that. Give me your card. I will have my lawyer call you. Thank you. Now say it really loud and with conviction. Give me your card. Okay. And the reason I say that is because it's all good to be sitting here and we talk about it, but when you're actually open the door and you're face to face with an FBI agent, your mouth goes dry and you go, won't you come in and have something to drink? That's not, and unless you rehearse this in your mind as to what you should do, and I've gone over this with my wife a dozen times and she still doesn't get it. She's still going to believe that she's going to invite them in and give them a cup of coffee and then they will understand. What you're supposed to do is go out. Don't let them come into the house, because once they come into the house, they start looking around and they will see things and then they'll ask questions about it, and pretty soon you're in the middle of a conversation with it and you can't get them out of the house. So you walk out, you step outside the door, say, I don't want to talk to you, give me your card, I'll have my lawyer call you. And I have to say from my own experience, I get quite a number of calls from people who have had exactly this problem. And in virtually in every case that I've handled, one possible exception, I called the FBI agent back, and I said, I'm ready to come down with my client. Well, I want immunity for him, and he's not going to say anything except through me. And they say, fine, okay, well then I'll call on to set up a date. And they never call back. Never call back. Not one of them has ever called back. And the reason they don't call back is that what they really wanted was to get you alone at the FBI headquarters, because they want to recruit you as an informant in your community. And the way they do that is by getting you alone in a room down at FBI headquarters. One of the things the FBI does is they will record you everywhere, secretly record you here, secretly record you there. They will have secret recordings of everything except anytime you're being interviewed. They will not record the interview. They have 2 agents present and they don't record the interview. The reason is they want to be able to say, we heard her say, or we heard him say the following, which was not true. It was a lie. They are allowed to lie to you, but you are not allowed to lie to them. And if you lie to them, that you can be charged. And so they can say, we heard you tell a lie, and we will charge you unless you become an informant. And we can prove that you lied because there was 2 of us there, and you're only one person, and there was no recording. You have no way out. You are trapped. And that's why we say, don't ever go down to the FBI without a lawyer. The second one is, on occasion, they will come and they will say, well, at least I want to look through your computer, I want to look through your house, I have the right to see these things, may I come in? And what you should always say, under all circumstances, is simply, I don't consent to a search. The reason for that is because the courts often want to side with the government. And if you have done anything that suggests that you were even ambiguous about whether the agents could come in and seize your computers, seize your books, look through your records, and so on, they would usually find that there was a kind of implied consent. So therefore, you have to start early and often and simply say, I don't consent to a search. They may go ahead and search anyway, but the point is it will set up something for later if you want to suppress what they searched. And the final thing is that if an FBI agent says, okay, fine, I'll give you my card. Can I come in and search your house? No, you can't. Well, all right, where's your wife? How old are your children? And it goes on for a bit. What you finally do to end this thing is to say, am I free to go, or am I under arrest? This puts the FBI agent in a difficult position because there is a very nuanced gradient of levels that they have to go to in terms of getting probable cause to move on to the next stage. And actually arresting somebody is quite high up on the totem pole, but they have suspicions, and then reasonable suspicions, and then grounded suspicions. The Supreme Court keeps adding new levels all the way along. So if you ask, am I under arrest or am I free to go? It puts the FBI agent on a spot because typically they don't have any evidence at all that there's any reason to detain you. And so they would typically have to say, no, you're free to go. And they say, fine, I'm going, and you go. And that's how you can kind of easily get out of a situation where they keep bugging you. So anyway, those were, do I have any time left? I wanted a few minutes? Okay. I just want to see if there are any questions from the audience about any of your rights. Yeah?
You say you don't consent to a search. Would they not bring like a warrant with them and say that whether or not you consent or not?
Very often they, for example, if you're in a car, they will very often want us to search your car, but they don't have a warrant. And so if you say I don't consent to a search, that would be a good way to stop that. But you're raising a situation where they come with a warrant, and a search warrant. That's a different situation because at that point you cannot resist if there is a warrant. So what you should do in those cases is make sure that you get the name of the officer. This is very important. It's amazing how many cases I've had in which the name of the officer becomes very critical later in trying to determine what happened and what happened to your stuff. And also to see what the warrant allows them to seize, and then not to permit them to seize anything beyond what the warrant allows. For example, one of the first things they will want to do is get a hold of your computer. they zero right in on this like a laser, but the warrant itself may not say that they have the right to seize the computer, in which case you're going to say, hey, you know, I want to see that warrant, and I want to see that you have the right to take my computer. Beyond that, there isn't a lot you can do to prevent it, other than to just try to check and make sure you know what they took, and to ask them to give you a complete list of all of the things that you took. Anybody else? Okay, I guess I'm out of time. Thank you very much, but I do urge you to pick up one of these books and read it. They're very well done, and it's great to be here. I thought you were the next people.
Would you pass this? I'm going to ask you to tell us more about like, the work that you do through the organization.
Okay. I was trying to apply with the time limit. The organization is set up, we have 20 different organizations, including the Muslim Legal Fund of America, including the Center for Constitutional Rights, National Lawyers Guild, UNAC, National Anti-War Coalition. So we're about equally combined with Muslim organizations, peace organizations, and civil rights organizations. And so what we try to do is to network with each other to work on various problems that appear. We've had a series of situations, for example, where people in jail are being treated horribly. And the question is, how do we deal with this? The Bureau of Prisons is particularly opaque. They are a realm unto themselves, and they don't respond. For example, if they deny people the right to pray, if they deny people the right to even communicate with their loved ones. Sometimes people are put in solitary confinement special. I mean, a lot of them are in solitary confinement already, but even their communication privileges are cut off. And I get calls all the time from people who are really frightened of what's happened. They think maybe their loved one has been killed. And so we try to get in touch with the prison. We try to find people, lawyers who can get through and raise these issues in court. So a lot of my work is spent dealing with particular problems of both the families and the prisoners. Another big issue that we deal with is trying to present a picture to the American public that they will understand. It's one thing to say, look, there's a lot of Muslims here who are being treated very badly by the government. Their rights are being denied. They're being thrown into jail on pretext charges, given extraordinarily long jail sentences. This is really outrageous. And a lot of Americans, I have to say, are sort of like, yeah, all right, too bad. So what? You know, there's a game of football on television. And I think that Americans will not understand the threat of what is happening unless they see themselves involved in it somehow. Now, of course, they are very involved in this. This is something that is going to strike us all very quickly. Because what is being set up here is the idea that America somehow is at war, is fighting a war with terror, and terror somehow is being equated with Islam. And so all of these people that I see on the board here are essentially prisoners in this war. And this war is being used to justify taking away all of our rights as citizens of the United States. We have rights as citizens, for example, to not have the government looking into our personal business, reading our emails, listening in on our phone conversations. The government is going right ahead and doing it. Not only are they going ahead and doing it, mass surveillance of everybody in the country, not just Muslims, everybody. But they feel free to lie to Congress about it. Why? Because it's classified. So they called James Clapper down to the Congress to have him testify about what they are reporting and who's being reported. And he says, oh no, we don't take the information from average Americans. And then Snowden makes a document that shows that he's committed perjury. It's an absolute lie. And of course, from Clapper's point of view, he has to lie because his alternative is to disclose confidential, classified information. And if he discloses classified information, he's in much worse shape than if he's perjured himself. If he discloses classified information, he will be treated like Snowden and Assange and Chelsea Bradley, and will be pursued all over the country. But if he perjures himself, the Justice Department will never condemn him. So these are some of the realities that we have to face as a country. And so part of what we try to do in our educational program is to get people to understand that you have to be far more scared of the government than you do of these so-called terrorists that we can't even define. The Muslim community is a very law-abiding, a very moral community. And there's no reason for them to be treated in this way and demeaned this way. And it's being done deliberately by the government to allow them to build this huge empire, a kind of police state that is now emerging that we can see much more clearly. Anyway, I believe you have next. Yeah, do you have a question? Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah.
This is really educational. As potential lawyers or work with law schools, I have this question about, do you think that there's something wrong with defense teams in these cases because the charges so ludicrous, or do you just think the justice system is failing?
One of the things the legal committee did was that they got as many of the top defense terrorism lawyers, and that's a special variety of the law right now, is terrorism law, together and to talk about exactly that question. Why are we losing so many cases? And the virtually unanimous agreement was that the field has been tilted so strongly against the defense that even if we tried a perfect case, you could not win them. And I must say, having looked at these cases myself, and actually having tried a case myself, I understand what they're talking about, because the laws, and I will give you just one example very quickly, I know I'm behind the schedule here. When we took an appeal of our case, in Yasin Araf's case, we thought we had a dozen arguments that would easily overturn the verdict. There were many, many errors. I don't want to go into them, I just don't have the time. But we filed our brief, the government filed their brief. Then the government filed a secret brief that we weren't allowed to see. Then the government filed a top secret brief that even the local prosecutor wasn't allowed to see. Then we went into court before the Second Circuit. We argued our case, they argued their case. Then we were excused, and the government went in and had a secret argument with the Second Circuit. And when we got the decision back, it was a decision that completely misrepresented all of the issues and found against us on everything, even to the point of saying we didn't have standing to raise the fact that there was secret evidence in the case because we couldn't prove that there was secret evidence in the case. Well, we knew there was secret evidence in the case because the government had been sending piles of it to the judge. And in fact, at one point, just to show how crazy the thing got, we made a motion that all of this, that we had to be able to see this information that was going to the judge. And the government opposed the motion, and they sent us the brief, and it was completely blank. There wasn't a single word, just the opening caption and the sign by the prosecutor at the bottom. And we were outraged. How can you defend a case in which you cannot even see the response to a motion by the government? So we were getting ready to ask the judge to turn the material over. Within an hour, we got a decision from the judge. And it was written, you could see, it comes straight from the Anti-Crime and Terrorism Unit in Washington. They simply faxed the judge the decision, and he had signed it and sent it out. But it was classified. You couldn't see what the decision was, other than that our motion was denied. But the whole rest of the decision was blank. And to this day, we've never seen it. That's an example of how the field is tilted. And it is tilted uniformly, I would say, in all of these cases that are right. Of course it does, but the courts are... Can I just take one more minute? There is a famous case, Korematsu, You probably are familiar with this. And if you remember, this is where the Japanese were relocated to inland because they presented supposedly a threat to the United States. And Korematsu challenged it, Fred Korematsu, and in the end, the government agreed that the order was racist, it was completely contrary to the Constitution, but the court said in a time of national crisis, weight had to be given to the government. And the government said, we have a secret report, a classified report that shows that the government, that the Japanese are a security risk. And on the basis of that report, they upheld the order. Now, it turned out later, historians 30 years later went back and looked at this order, looked at this secret report, and it turned out that there was a secret report. But the secret report said that the Japanese were not a security risk. The Solicitor General had simply stood up in court and bold-facedly lied before the Supreme Court. And on the basis of that lie, the Supreme Court reversed the decision. And Fred Korematsu's conviction was reversed. He was later given the Medal of Freedom. Everybody loved the Japanese. But the lesson that came out of it was, if you don't like the Constitution, if you want to avoid the Bill of Rights and you are the government, all you need is a war and a classified document. It doesn't matter what's in the classified document because you can lie about it and nobody can prove that you're wrong. And that somehow, somewhere along the line, after 9/11, Cheney picked up on this. This is how you got his torture memo through. Remember, he wanted to torture, we really want to torture more people, but it's against the law. How do we do this? Everybody knows it's against the law. He got a young guy in his department, John Yoo, to write an opinion saying that torture was legal. It was a complete piece of garbage, total nonsense. But he classified it, so nobody could prove that it was bad. So all they could say is, hey, there's an opinion out from the council saying you can torture people. Go ahead and torture them to their heart's content. Later, they leaked the decision, the opinion by you, and people were horrified. They said this is an awful decision, an awful opinion, and they were actually talking about disbarring you as an attorney because of this horrible decision that he'd written on the basis of which thousands of people were tortured all over the world. But instead, they had a better idea because they realized the power of the Korematsu decision. And they said, let's make him a professor down at Berkeley, I think. Yeah. So he's now a professor at Berkeley. But I just want to show that this consistently has, I'm talking too much, has influenced the way the law has worked in this, so that as long as you have a war, and that's what these prisoners are all here, they represent a war on terror that we can't define and will never end, and we have classified material. And with that, you can do anything you wanted to get around the Constitution. Korematsu says you can do it. Okay?
Thank you so much for that piece of information, all the education piece of information you provided. Now I'd like to give the stand to Sara Del Condor. She is the daughter of one of these political prisoners. I'm really happy, and we're also excited that she's actually here to speak about this very emotional subject. So if you guys would all welcome her with a warm round of applause.
Good afternoon. Being born in Oklahoma and raised in Dallas for most of my life, we were always taught, America's land of the free, home of the brave, place where justice and law prevails, no matter what political agenda there is, no matter how evil some politicians can be. We were told that no matter what, the Bill of Rights trumped whatever injustice opinion that there may be, inalienable rights could never be trampled upon. This is what we grew up knowing, believing. We trusted it. We trusted it very ignorantly. Our story is just as Dred Scott, as when they said separate is equal. It's okay for them, for blacks and whites to be separate. But then in the end, decisions are always changed because people understand that sometimes when there's fear involved and they try to scare people, they can get away with a lot of things that's not legal. So it doesn't make sense that 5 humanitarians who worked and the government admitted that not one penny went to terrorism. Every single penny went to backpacks and books and orphans and everything that you could imagine people living in a third world country, war-torn, have nothing, would need was provided to them. Oil, rice, everything that they would need was given to them. And and they did this in the name of America, in the name of helping people, because this is what they believed was the American dream. That you help yourself, you help others. This is what they believed, and this is what they strove for. And instead of that, they were sent to jail for up to 65 years, while people who are guilty of espionage, who betrayed the United States, who sold secrets to other countries, are simply forgiven and they walk away. That doesn't make any sense. The HLF they were accused of sending money to zakat committees, which is committees in the West Bank that are controlled by people who are not nonpartisan, because it's like a religious thing where they give out money to those who are the most needy of it. And they were guilty of sending to those committees who they believed were affiliated with Hamas. However, this same government, at the same time the HLF was doing this, sent money, USAID, which is a government charity organization, they sent to those exact same committees. So if the HLF is guilty, then so is this same government. Because it doesn't make any sense. It's simply because of who they are. It's a war on who they are and not a war on what they did. For the first time, I sat in my government 2301 class at the same time when my dad was having the trial. And we were taught the rights of the Bill of Rights, and you have a right to know who witnesses against you, who this identity is, so you know how to defend yourself. Because if you don't know who he is, then you can't even defend. You don't even know what he's saying or where he's bringing it from. However, for the first time ever in U.S. history, an expert witness was allowed to be admitted, and his identity was completely withheld from the defense and the public. So the defense didn't know who he was, and the public was not allowed to attend. If the President of the United States were to come and be an expert witness in a court of law in the United States, he would have to reveal his identity. So why are certain people above the law? This is a non-negotiable right. We cannot say, oh, because we're just going to have to make an exception. We cannot make an exception to people's rights. This is when innocent people start being sent to jail. And this, he was under the name of Abi, and he testified about these zakat committees, but he never even stepped foot in one. So everything he said was hearsay, which is again illegal. As a witness, you're not allowed to say or talk about something you personally did not experience. But again, admitted as evidence, it didn't matter. He had no worries of perjury because we don't even know who he is. We can't prove he was lying. We have no way of defending ourselves. There's decades of illegal wiretaps. Again, all illegal. You have to get an approval from a judge. They didn't do that. They went ahead, they wiretapped whatever they decided to, whatever they could, and all of them were admitted into evidence. Again, not legal, not allowed through our judicial system, but apparently we can make exceptions. Inflammatory bias, irrelevant propaganda, documents unsigned, we don't know where they came from, we don't know who they belong to, had absolutely no relevance to the actual trial, again, were admitted as evidence. And so when people have questions how, it's not how good the lawyers are, it's that you have all these odds stacked against you. You can do everything you can. We called for mistrial, I think, like more than 11 times because of things that have never even happened in history before happened to us. And in the end of the day, you have to just wait for God to do justice, because not even the strongest country in the world, it took a while for the African Americans to get their rights, and the communists, and everyone else who was always persecuted simply because of who they were. And this is no difference. So it's not always about persecuting people to get justice. Sometimes they are prosecuting people with the purpose of alienation of a whole community, which is what they tried to do. They tried to go ahead and get a whole group of people. As you can tell, most of the names they're not very American-sounding names. And they go ahead and attack the whole identity of people under the terms of fear, and they're going to hurt us, and we have to defend ourselves. So they get away with all these trampling of rights. But if they're going to trample on our rights, be sure that they will trample on your rights. So if we give up a little bit of freedom for a little bit of security, I remember Benjamin Franklin saying, we deserve neither freedom or security. You don't deserve either. You cannot let go of part of the Bill of Rights and expect the rest to work. It's all or nothing. You cannot be half free, you have to be completely free. And so we did everything we could. Same thing, we had the appeal, we worked for the Supreme Court, and all at the same time they just said no, no. When we appealed the first time, they said, oh, we know that there have been some illegal actions that have been done within the court, but they were harmless. I don't know how it can be harmless. If they're illegal, they should not happen at all. There's no such thing as a harmless illegal action. If it's illegal, it should not be allowed, period. But in the end of the day, Mandela was sent to prison, and so was Gandhi, and so was MLK Jr., but in the end of the day, they left. Because no matter how big someone is, justice is always greater than that. And the people who have the will and know the truth are much greater than any government power. And that's what's going to happen. In the end of the day, they're in jail now, but they will be free. And I'm sure of that.
And I just want to say that speaking of the Holy Land case, this is my the worst case, I think, that of all of these cases here, and all of them make my heart bleed. But there's something special about the Holy Land case of going after people who were genuinely compassionate, who genuinely wanted to help people in trouble in the Middle East. And a decision was made in Washington somewhere that we don't want these people helping. We don't want these people to be helped. And this foundation is going to be taken down. And it doesn't matter whether they violated any laws. We're going to invent laws that they made. And if we can't get them any other way, we're going to keep at it, and we're going to keep at it until finally they're locked up. And this is the most clearly political decision I have ever seen of all the cases. And I think all of the cases are political decisions. But there's something particularly horrific about this case in the way the law was bent and manipulated and trampled on and disregarded, and finally goes to the Supreme Court and they don't redo it. As a lawyer, I despair when I read this case. And I'm so glad that you talk so openly about it. Thank you.
At this point, we want to open the floor to any questions. So if anybody has any questions for Mr. C or Sarah or anything. Anyone have any questions? Yes.
I know you guys appealed to the Supreme Court and they didn't grant cert, so what is the course of action now to grant, I guess, there's no more redress available?
They're trying the writ of habeas corpus, which is where they go back to the judge, and they try to get him to see that some things were done wrong in the court, but it goes back to the St. Joseph Act, which is not a good chance. That's only legal.
I mentioned in my case, the RF case I was talking about earlier. We went all the way through the Supreme Court, and they turned us down also. And then we foiled some documents. I foiled some documents earlier, got nothing. And then Yassine foiled some documents and actually got some papers from the government. They're all redacted, except for the label on the file. And the label said Yassine Araf, AKA Mohammed Yassine Al-Qaeda. And it suggested that the government believed that Yassine Araf was an Al-Qaeda agent named Mohammed Yassine. We Googled the name, and it turned out, in fact, it was a Al-Qaeda named Mohammed Yassine. He was a famous bomb maker. And he was blown up by a missile in Gaza in 2010. So if he was blown up in Gaza in 2010, Yassine Araf could not have been Mohammed Yassine. So on that basis, we're making a 2255 motion suggesting that all of the secret evidence that government was feeding to the courts was in effect, we know who this guy is. He's a very famous bomb maker named Mohammed Yassin. And it doesn't matter that there's no evidence in the case, you've got to convict him. And we believe if the court is honest, they will look at it and say, yeah, that's exactly what happened. That's why we convicted him. And hopefully they would reopen the case. I have no faith in the courts at this point. I don't believe any of them are honest. But I certainly hope that the Holy Land Foundation, the defendants in those cases, can go back and bring out similar facts to show how the case was manipulated. Because we know politically it was manipulated. There's simply no excuse for having an anonymous witness. This is unheard of. There must have been direct contact with probably the Israeli government who said these guys are a nuisance to us.
There were some.
Yeah, I mean, we know this. This is a political act on behalf of, it's an act of foreign policy, not of justice. Anyway, 2255 motion, the habeas corpus, that's the one probable relief, as long as you can raise new evidence. That's the critical fact. Yeah.
Can you talk about what Dr. Abdulqader, since he's acquitted but he's still in jail?
Well, that's a great example. The government, as I say, these are political cases. And the government wants them locked up. They don't care what the reason for it is. And there are a number of cases here that you have in which people were actually found not guilty. Very few. I would say probably 3 or 4 or 5 cases on the board I could identify. And in every one of those cases, the government went after the person again and came up with another batch of cases, another batch of charges. In the, which one is it? What was it? Oh yeah, Ashgar. Right. What happened was that, now, you know, which court was this?
Oh, I don't know.
You don't remember?
I know, I think it was obstruction of justice is what they...
Yeah, well, but the question was it Gordon Cromberg?
Probably.
In Virginia, there's a particularly Islamophobic prosecutor called Gordon Cromberg. And he's the one actually that has a Samuel case as well. And he has a pattern on Sabri Bankala, another person like that, was found innocent. What he tends to do is call people before a grand jury and have them testify about what they were found innocent of, and then charge them with perjury, and then bring perjury charges against them. This is what he did with Sabri Bankala, who was found innocent of the paintball case. Called before a grand jury, he testified on the grand jury, was charged with perjury for that, and was convicted, and then is now spending 10 years in jail. I think Dr. Ashgar was very similar. He was acquitted, and then they went after him either, probably called him before a grand jury, and he refused to testify, and so they charged him with obstruction of justice. And that's exactly what happened with Samuel Aaron. He was not found guilty either. But same prosecutor then called him before a grand jury in Virginia, and he refused to testify because they all saw what happened to Sabri Bankala. So these are just examples of how the government does not give up on these cases. It's not a sense of justice. It's not a sense of treating people fairly. It's a question of a political decision has been made to lock these people up. If we miss the first time, we'll just go back and do it again. And we'll keep doing it over and over and over again until we get them locked up. Yeah.
Okay, so you're saying that in a time of war, it's a lot easier for the government to take actions like this. And we're fighting a war against an entity that can't ever really be beaten. So when does this war end, and when these policies come to an end?
Well, that's exactly what I'm saying. Thank you. The war cannot end as long as there is a terrorist left alive. And a terrorist, as we know, is someone who is trying to change the policy of the government by the threat of violence or illegal means. If there's someone in the world that wants to change the policy of the government, and the world knows there's enough policies in the government that everybody should be trying to change, then we're still going to be continuing to fight the war of terrorism. So I think the war on terror is going to go on forever until American people are thoroughly sick of it. But the real reason the government wants this war on terror is because they have new technology that allows them to listen in on virtually everybody. Now, you have to understand that this technology, this mass surveillance society, is not good at finding terrorists. It becomes overwhelmed by the vast amounts of data that come in, and it's almost impossible out of all this data to pick out the few phrases that would indicate that somebody somewhere has become a terrorist and is wanting to do something. What it's really good at is listening in on people that you want to listen in on, like the president of France, or the president of Brazil, the president of Russia, or maybe members of Congress when they're at home talking to their girlfriends, or maybe leaders of dissident communities. That's what it's really good at. And when you combine with the ability to assassinate people and the ability to hold them under NDAA indefinitely without charges, and the ability to torture, this becomes a really powerful ability to control the world and the place where we're basically going to be living in a police state. So that's why I guess I'm suggesting that we are in a very difficult civil rights position, which most Americans are not aware of. How many people here would have thought of it that way, that we are facing essentially a police state right now? Until Americans start to think that way, I think it's going to be very hard to turn this around. I see a little bit of it in Congress now. Every now and then Congressmen are sort of saying, really, should we be listening in on everybody? Isn't there a constitutional thing about unreasonable searches and seizures? But so far it hasn't gained much traction. But that's why we need you. We need you on it. Other question?
Yeah, there was outrage. That's what the church committee was all about. Trying to rein in this with COINTELPRO, and so we had sort of been through this exercise not too long ago, and then that's all gotten wiped away with NDAA and Patriot Act.
How many people here have ever heard of COINTELPRO? Back in the 60s, there was the government went through a very similar period where there was the Black Panthers and the Indian rights movement and the Puerto Rican national movement and women's rights movements. You know, it's like, oh my God. There were groups in the government that thought everything was falling down. I mean, this is going to be the end of the world. And said, this is a national security matter. We are at war. We are at war with our own citizens. And so they developed a program called COINTELPRO that would allow the government to basically disrupt and bring false charges against people, and actually in a couple of cases had targeted assassinations of Black Panthers. I put them down there in the corner. They are the gray brown folks at the bottom there, because I don't want them forgotten. There's hundreds of them still in prison from that period. Some of them have been in solitary confinement for over 40 years. One of them just was released a couple weeks ago. He'd been 40 years in jail, and a federal judge reviewed his case and said, I'm going to throw out the conviction. And he went home and he died 3 days later. Anyway, those are people I want to get out. But we know all about COINTELPRO, and that when it came to light what the FBI was doing, the church committee, was a committee of Congress, held hearings, and they declared that this was essentially a war on domestic peaceable people exercising their First Amendment rights. It was unconscionable. It should not have happened. It should never happen again. They were going to adopt procedures to make sure it never happened again. And then after 9/11, they simply removed all of those restrictions, and it came roaring back again. And we're right in the middle of COINTELPRO again, only this time on steroids. Do you have much contact with the other folks in the Holy Land Foundation case? Can you talk a little bit about their other cases? Just the people? The families?
What about the families?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, just how they're bearing up under all of this.
Well, I know it's really hard for some. I mean, especially for the Abdulqader family. His daughter died and he wasn't able to, even talk to her. I guess that's really hard. I got married. My dad wasn't there. It's like everything, all the most important milestones that you wait for, like a father or a mom or anybody who raises a child waits to see, they missed it. And it's something that I can say it's unforgivable. Because, I mean, to do something wrong and to go to jail, you can say, oh, they deserved it, you know? But to do nothing and to be in the opposite, to actually have done good things and to be sent to jail and to miss these important milestones are really, really hard. Like I know, look at the daughter, she had a baby, and, you know, life changes and they're just so out of the loop with the families. I think it's the hardest. Just in general, it's just life, like not being able to see or sit down, or especially because my dad he's in a CMU. They went to jail, so you would assume that that's it. I mean, the government is done. But we had the prosecutor actually call the jail that they were in because they were in a jail like 30 minutes from our house. And he's saying, oh, they're threatful and all this kind of stuff. And so you need to move them to a CMU, which is essentially you restrict all their contact with the outside world. So they only get like 2 phone calls a week, and they're 15 minutes, and non-contact visits. Even if and they move them like 15 hours away driving. They move them really far away. And then even when I do go visit him, he's in a room, I'm in a room, there's one telephone for 3 people, or how many people would come. So it's just, like, it wasn't enough that they went to jail, they had to make it even more difficult. Like, even harder, that you can't, like, even say hi or no. Yes. And it's been like that since I was in 4th grade. So, you're just dealing with that kind of stuff. I mean, I know, I know he doesn't have very much contact with his family until recently they moved him, because he's in California, his family is in Wisconsin, so they were very, very far away from him. And recently they moved him here, so it's getting better. But the rest, I mean, it's hard. A lot of things change. I think the hardest thing for them is that their kids grow up and stuff, and then when they go visit, they feel like they don't kind of know them anymore. They're out of touch.
How often do you visit him?
Probably once a year. Because he's really far away, and then he only gets 2 visits a month. So, like, if my uncle goes to visit him, we can't visit. And then they have, like, the issue, because there are other people who are in the CMU as well. They only have 1 visiting room. And so if they're using it, we can't go. And then we even went the last time and we lost like more than half of our visit because their telephone wasn't working. Even though we took permission like more than a month ahead of time. And I know they did that to the Underbakke family as well. And I know a second time they had everything ready, they were about to go visit, and then they told them, sorry, they're on lockdown after they both were together. So it's very difficult. It's not easy to go.
How long are the visits if it all goes well?
They're around 4 hours.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, first of all, I used to take the kids, the Yesenia has 4 kids, and so I used to drive them out from Albany to the SMU, the CMU in Terre Haute, Indiana. And with the young kids, it was about a 2-day trip. So you drive 2 days out, you have 1 day out there, and then you have 2 days. So it was like a 5-day event. And I was, the first time I went out, I arrived there, and we went into the place that you described it with a plate glass window and a telephone, and the kids were talking. And I had a pen with me, and I took it out, and I started to make some notes about what he had said. And people immediately rushed in and said, oh, your visit is over, you're canceled, you're thrown out, this is horrible misconduct. I said, why? They said, you're not allowed to bring in a pen. I said, no one told me that. There's nothing there. I signed the whole thing saying I didn't have any bombs, I didn't have any stuff, I didn't have any electronic equipment or anything else. They said, you signed a document that said that you didn't have any secret recording devices. That's the secret recording device. You're out of here. So we had to go back 2 days back to Albany. And this is the kind of nonsense that they pull. They want to make life as difficult as possible and as nasty as possible. And it's and you see why? Why, if they're going to frame people, innocent people, why would they do that? And I think the answer to that is because these are true political prisoners. They have to make it appear that these are genuine ideological threats, that somehow these people contain a message that is so dangerous that if it escaped, it would be like a virus that would run all over the country and everybody would go crazy or something. So we have to lock them in a way, in a place where they can never be heard. And we have to treat them as though they are the worst of the worst, rather than being simple, human, compassionate individuals who were trapped in a completely unfair situation by the government. The government cannot acknowledge that, and that's why people are in this again.
Lynn Stewart is dying in prison.
Yeah, do I have a moment, or I just want to mention 2 cases or not? You tell me.
I think that's 5 minutes. We have to just get
I just want to mention 2 cases. One was of Lynn Stewart. She was representing, is the only lawyer, I think, on the list here. She was representing the blind sheikh, and at some point, he was under SAMS, which is a special restriction which does not permit you, if you talk to the person, you cannot explain to anybody else what that was about, but he said. And Lynn just was a lawyer saying, how can I represent my client if I can't talk about what my client said? So she called a press conference one day and sort of talked about what he had said in jail. And the government went after her and got her convicted because simply talking to the media about what your client said was material support for terrorism, according to the government. And so she was convicted of that. She's spending 10 years in jail. She's disbarred. So she's 74 now, but she has advanced breast cancer and is about to die in prison. And there's a big movement to try to get her released, at least to go home to die. The Justice Department is so far really resisting this, but if you could write to the Justice Department or make a call on her behalf, we would certainly appreciate it. One of the big campaigns that the NCPCF is conducting, yeah?
She's in prison like 30 miles away from here in Fort Worth.
Yes, she is, right, in Carswell. Exactly, I'm in Texas, right. That's, you know what, this is one of the things I associate Texas with, is Lynn Stewart. And the other person, oddly enough, that we have a big campaign going right now is Afia Siddiqui. How many know Afia Siddiqui's case? Oh, everybody does it. Great, I don't have to tell you. But there are, I believe, as we speak, President Obama is talking to the Prime Minister of Pakistan. And the big question on everybody's mind is, will they raise the A word, Afia? And does Pakistan really want Afia back? And does the United States really want to swap her for Davis? And there's a lot of high international stuff going on here about this. So anyway, keep your fingers crossed and hope that maybe they can do a prisoner swap for Afia.
And I want to just thank the NCPCF members for coming out here. They flew in and drove in from northern United States, so I really appreciate them coming. I really appreciate you coming as well, Sarah. We really appreciate the input that you gave. I hope everyone learned a lot today, and I hope that you guys can always come to our events. So just keep a lookout for what we have planned for the rest of the semester, and make sure you sign the petitions that they have and take any of the information packets that they have as well. And yeah, have a good rest of your day. Thank you.